Welcome to the first edition of What If Mania. This podcast is brought by a bunch of marks who finally decided to record all those ramblings of wrestling and put it out there. Because, well, why not? Rather than discussing the state of the current wrestling world, this podcast, as mentioned in its name, discusses the big what if moments that never came to fruition. So let's take a trip down memory lane and start with one of the biggest what if moments in the wrestling world. What if Sting versus Taker ever came about? But before we discuss all that, let's introduce ourselves. There's three of us here today. My name is TJ. We have AJ and the biggest wrestling fan of them all. We call him Baldy.
So my name is AJ, and as a quick intro, I just kind of want to give a quick recap as to what got me into wrestling and what kind of got me hooked when I was a kid. So I grew up in the 90s. That was my era. Probably the golden age of era, if you ask most people. And I think in terms of moments that I kind of go back to and think about, there's a lot of different moments, but for me, it was the rivalry between Bret and Shawn. For me as a kid, growing up in a household with cousins that were also big wrestling fans, you kind of had to pick your own favorite wrestler. And since I grew up with TJ, who is a cousin of mine, his favorite wrestler was Bret Hart. So I had to go with the next best option, which was Shawn Michaels. So that rivalry, and I think the Iron Man match for me was probably one of the biggest moments that I remember as a kid in terms of watching a pay-per-view with my cousins, and just that moment really kind of captures my childhood and really kind of got me hooked into wrestling.
And as TJ mentioned, I'm the biggest wrestling fan here, Baldy. For me, I grew up probably one of the biggest Hulkamaniac fans growing up. So Hulk Hogan was I consider a hero of mine growing up. So I got to live through a lot through the early 90s, and then as well as, the heel turn in 96. But I grew up a huge Hulkamaniac. One of my favorite matches, even though he lost, was probably WrestleMania 6 with the Ultimate Warrior. So, over the years, we've always talked a lot about wrestling. So this is going to be good.
And that actually creates a perfect segue for mine. Growing up, yes, I was a big Bret Hart fan, but even before that, I was a big Ultimate Warrior fan. And while I never understood any one of his promos at the time, the fact that he got so hyped got me hyped. And his intro, when he ran to the ring, it was phenomenal. The way he'd shake the ropes, the way he'd run around, his matches would be like 30 seconds. So you couldn't even leave the room because you missed something. And he really brought me into the world, and it's been nonstop ever since.
Yeah, so as TJ mentioned in the intro, the whole point of this episode is to discuss Taker versus Sting. And obviously that was a match that never really happened. But we want to kind of go back and visit and just kind of think, what if? Like, how would we have booked it? So before we kind of get into how we would have booked Taker versus Sting, I think it makes sense to look back into Sting's run with the WWE, and I'm gonna hand it over to Baldy. And so Baldy, if you can maybe just kind of recap how Sting's run was booked, and just the kind of like ups and downs in terms of what you thought how his run went.
So Sting's deal with WWE actually came into fruition when he signed the Legends deal to appear in the WWE 2K game. And that led to him, making that first appearance back at Survivor Series 2014 when he showed up in the main event when it was the Authority against Cena's team, and led to Cena's team winning. So that kind of built the story for everyone thought that,
So, sorry, Baldy, not to cut you off, but so could you maybe just kind of go back and just remind me, how was he, how did he enter the pay-per-view?
So
at what part did he interrupt that match?
So it was getting to the end of it was a 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match, and it was down to Seth Rollins and Dolph Ziggler. Triple H, who was the leader of the Authority, playing on Rollins' side. So he had come in, pedigreed Ziggler. Referee was out of commission. Rollins went over for the cover. Another referee came down with one, went two, and all of a sudden the lights flickered, and you start to hear sounds of crows. And then you see Sting's image appear on the Titantron, and then you suddenly see him appear, and then the crowd erupted, and then the announcers did the whole introduction. This is his first appearance in WWE, and it led to a very awkward sort of a stare down with Triple H and Sting when he came into the ring.
Yeah.
And as I like to call it, it was the kick of doom when he gave Triple H a kick, and Triple H looked like he was bent over for quite a long period of time before Sting gave him his finishing move, the Scorpion Death Drop. And then he put Dolph Ziggler over Seth Rollins, and Ziggler ended up getting the win for his team,
Right.
and that kind of built up the feud between Triple H and Sting leading up to WrestleMania. So he'd make the occasional appearances on Raw and whatnot, and just did everything he could to be a thorn in the side of the Authority, which
Yeah.
eventually led to the match at WrestleMania.
But I think this goes back to that first point. Did he really do everything that he could have? Because wasn't he really underutilized going into WrestleMania? This is a guy who debuted at Survivor Series in November.
Yeah.
Didn't make his next Raw appearance on, what was it, January, I think?
It was a while.
It was a while. And even then, it was still sporadic leading up to Mania. And this is, again, another one of my gripes with how things go.
Yeah.
But that, even a build up with Triple H, which is another side rant as to why they even picked Triple H in the first place for his first match, could have been so much longer.
Yeah, so I mean, at that time, what they say is, they had Bray Wyatt penciled in for the Undertaker at WrestleMania 31, and so when Sting came in, they figured, okay, the next marquee name on the list is Triple H. So that's how that match came into fruition. Like, Vince McMahon never saw Sting versus Undertaker as a big WrestleMania match, which is so disappointing for so many fans. But that's what a lot of the dirt sheet writers had to say.
And then
I remember that was a big thing too, because every time people ever brought up this topic about Sting versus Taker, when he was close in 2011 to re-signing again, people again asked, like, how come it's not happening? And a large part of that, according to Meltzer and the other people, were just Vince McMahon didn't see it happening. He didn't see the reason behind putting two guys, possibly, well, at least in Sting's case, past their prime, putting at Mania.
Yeah, because I mean, even looking back at some of the rumor times when Sting was so close to signing with WWE, like according to so many different sources, is 2002 when he was close to signing. The plan was for him and Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 18, and as Bruce Pritchard recently mentioned on his podcast, WrestleMania 21, The Rock wanted Sting to come in. So like Sting and Undertaker was, as much as the fans wanted it, it was never in the plans for WWE.
It's a little ironic, though, isn't it, that The Rock wanted Sting, yet The Rock was also one of the biggest reasons why Sting never came to the WWE. With that little cut that he made of Booker T, and he looks at him and he goes, "Who
That's
are
a great
you?"
point. Yeah.
It's like the irony is insane.
Yeah.
Because he sees the value of it. I'm sure it was just The Rock being The Rock, but that one comment really spurned him and told him to go to TNA and sit there for like a next number of years. I think it was like 11 years.
It was quite some time, yeah. Because as soon as his deal with Warner Brothers expired, that's where he ended up going.
Right. So then, just to kind of bookend his run with the WWE, so he had his match with Triple H at WrestleMania, and then he fought, I think, once more after that with Seth Rollins, right?
That is correct. So they thought that the match with Triple H, he ended up being on the losing end. Fans were unhappy, saying he was brought in as a WCW guy and he was buried, and so hey, let's give him a world title shot. And fans had thought, hey, maybe there's a chance he might win, maybe not, and then that's where he ended up suffering that career-ending injury.
Yeah, like that match kind of made no sense to me because like I don't really know at that age like what a world title run would have done for Sting. Like I think most fans knew that he was going to lose to Seth Rollins, who was like the next up and coming superstar. But so kind of touching on to those rumors and stuff. So like you said, there were two other times that Sting could have come in to WWE. The first being when WWE bought WCW. And I know that there was a lot of interviews that he had done where he had discussed about potentially coming over, but he wasn't really comfortable with how he thought Vince might take his character. How close was he really, though? Like, because I had seen some interviews where he had good dialogue with Vince, but for whatever reason, he just decided to not come in. Do you think he was really that close in 2001?
I want to say he was, because at that time, like, TNA wasn't really, what it became to be when he actually ended up going a few years later. But I think at that time, he was off for some time, had some chance to recoup from some injuries and whatnot. So I think he was prepared, but at the same time, he was watching the product, and everyone saw how the whole invasion angle went. We'll touch on that probably on a future episode, but everybody saw how that went, and The Rock's comments on Booker T and just how everybody in WCW was buried. So I think, like, he had that fear of he's going to come in, and then he's just going to be buried.
And do you think like his fear was justified? Like, do you think if he came in 2001 and kind of given what the product was like, so maybe I'll kind of start with TJ first. Do you think if he came in like that Sting 2001 version, if he came into the business at that point, do you think his run would have been successful?
It's tough to say. I do think his concerns were valid at that time coming in, because you got to understand he was a face, he was a franchise of WCW for a very long time, and to come in and think that you're going to have that same sort of seniority, that same sort of sway, that same sort of influence in backstage as those core WWE guys at the time, he saw the writing on the wall, and for him that was one of the biggest reasons why he was so hesitant to come in, because he would almost be taking a few steps down for the most part. I know it's a lot of like what ifs, but that's what we're all about. But I do feel like he would have been taking a step down and not have as much creative control as they did in WCW, which is both, the double-edged sword with how things unfolded there. But I do think they were valid. I think at that time for 2001, for the best thing for him was not to sign.
Yeah, that's fair. And then his second time, I think Baldy, you had mentioned it was 2011 when his contract was up with TNA, I think. But again, he never
Yeah, like
joined.
that was another one of those where there was that vignette that was created, which ended up ultimately being the Undertaker. But again, the reports say that was set for Sting, but again, no one confirmed it. It was just most recently that Bruce Pritchard had mentioned, hey, in 2005, The Rock really wanted to bring him in. Like that had not come to light before until he just recently touched on
Hmm.
it. So that would have been rather interesting. But again, it's another one of those, for whatever reason, Vince McMahon didn't see Undertaker and Sting. But the fact that, The Rock wanted to work with him, it showed that, The Rock looked at, what he had done in the business and everything he had accomplished, and, who was someone he hadn't faced that he looked up to. And,
Yeah.
Sting fit that bild.
And so like you've mentioned The Rock as being someone that really wanted to fight him, and like Kurt Angle was another name that has been kind of brought up, and I think Kurt Angle was one that did want to fight Sting in a WWE ring. But one rumor that we've never really heard is Undertaker really kind of pushing that, right? And like given his stature with the company, like usually whatever Undertaker wants, he gets, right? Just because of how long he's been there and his like loyalty to Vince and all that stuff. But um, from what I've seen just over the years, I've never seen anything that kind of showed Undertaker really wanting that match against Sting. What do you guys think about that?
With Taker, it's the only time that I've heard where he's requested to work with somebody was Ric Flair at WrestleMania 18. But Taker's like the ultimate company guy. If you've seen some of the WrestleMania matches that, infamously, Giant Gonzalez for WrestleMania 9, which Taker has said that, took years off his career, just the matches, that match in particular, as well as, the matches on the house shows that led to that, just the beatings that he took on his body and the toll it took. Like, Taker was never someone to demand, hey, this is who I want to have a match with. Like, it's just, who what feels right. Like, he had WrestleMania matches against Mark Henry. Like, I can see, he didn't end up requesting it. Maybe he didn't want it, but in later years he's come out and that's the dream match that everybody's wanted.
Hey man, I don't want to hate on sexual chocolate, because you cannot put him on the same level as freaking giant crappy Gonzalez. Because that was a bust. Not only that, but I can't get over his outfit, man. What he wore, it still gives me nightmares. But he was a freaky looking dude. But that match was horrible. He knew it. But again, I do agree in the sense that he's a company guy through and through. You put anybody before him, he's one of those guys. You tell him to go fight a chair, and he'll be like, "All right, Vince, I'll make it happen. I'll make it something big." He's not one to kind of go out there and be like, "I want this. I need this. You should do this." His rapport, especially with this Taker special that came out post WrestleMania and Boneyard match, him and Vince are like incredibly close. And I mean, everyone already knows that if he has enough sway to ever ask for something, he'll get it. But he also knows how Vince works, and he also probably already knew what Vince's vision was and where he stood on certain things. And at that time, especially in '01, you had an invasion happening, you had WCW being brought out. There's a lot of change happening, and the last thing he was probably going to do is come in and be like, "Yeah, so we should get Sting too because I want to match with him."
Yeah, I mean, like that's fair, but like I don't know, like I just like Sting versus Taker is such a massive match, and like just the promos alone would have sold so many seats. So I understand in the later years why Vince wouldn't want that, and I think Pritchard had tweeted that like the reason why they never fought was because of Vince. When he came back a couple years ago, is because he just didn't think the match would hold up.
Yeah.
But I don't know,
Again,
like,
that match is what fans wanted, you know?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like Taker's just like, yo, man, I'll do whatever kind of thing.
but that's not true though, because like the reason, like when he lost to Brock, he was the one that pushed that he wanted Brock to beat his streak at WrestleMania, right? Like that wasn't WWE being like, hey, like this is what's gonna happen. That was him telling them like this is what I want, right? So like, why couldn't he go to them and be like, I want to face Sting?
I think it's different when you're saying that I want to bring in a certain talent. I want to bring in this guy from WCW that we're still kind of like at odds with because he won't sign. And it's different with a guy like Brock, who he has a very close friendship with. And
I
to
guess,
say,
yeah.
and not only that, but it was also it was being floated around for a few years even prior to that, that if you believe the rumor mill, he was looking for someone to break the streak. He
Right.
wanted to end on that streak being broken. He approached Triple H. Triple H was like, nah. He approached Kane. Kane's like, nah. So Brock was probably the only guy to be like, yo, man, for sure, I'll do it.
Believe it or not, Mark Henry was another conversation about possibly ending the streak.
And you wanted to put him in the same conversation as Giant Gonzalez.
That would have been brutal. And like you guys were there for that WrestleMania. Like, could you imagine if you guys had flown all the way out there and it was Mark Henry that broke the streak?
It would have been pretty shocking. I mean, we probably would have still walked away happy. That card was rather weak, but we would have walked away happy just with the whole Daniel Bryan, the ending, and everything else with it. But it would have been pretty funny to see Sexual Chocolate come out there and him being the guy who goes down in history as who broke the streak.
Well, I mean, it's funny because had that happened, that match occurred 8 years prior, so the streak would have long been gone if they had original plan. Like it was WrestleMania 22 when he fought Mark Henry in the casket match. Like there was talk of, it was very brief, according to Bruce Pritchard. It was very brief talk of the streak ending, but it didn't go very far.
Right. And I was looking into like there was an interview or documentary that Sting had done. I think it was called Over the Rope or something like that, or like Top, I don't know, something along those lines. And he was saying how he had met Undertaker kind of backstage. I think it was during his time with the company. I don't think it was before or after, but I could be wrong. But he basically kind of detailed his conversation with Undertaker, and he was like, hey man, like it would have been great, or it would be great to kind of like do a one-on-one with you at like WrestleMania or just like some sort of big pay-per-view. And Sting, like the way that he kind of summarized that conversation, he said that the feeling was mutual. So I don't think in his mind he thought the Undertaker really wanted to square off against him. And you know what? Like I think you guys might have a point. I think it might just be that Vince kind of had talked about it with the Undertaker and was like, you know what, like the match is gonna suck. It's just gonna like ruin both you guys' legacy. There's just no point in doing it. And
I do recall that interview, and
yeah,
I remember Sting kind of talking about how that feeling wasn't reciprocated. But I don't think it was so much that it was. I don't think for him and the way I read it was Taker didn't show that same excitement to be like,
yeah,
I want to face you and I want to make this happen. He was just kind
yeah,
of like, yo, man, that's awesome. Like, yeah, we should definitely see if that happens, kind of thing.
right, yeah. He wasn't
Whereas
as
he was
excited.
looking
Yeah,
for like, yeah, man, I make this happen.
right, yeah. So we kind of went through the rumors and whatnot, and I think maybe now we should just kind of get into how we would book Taker versus Sting and just kind of Sting's run with the company. So I guess maybe the first question that we should maybe agree on is how long of a run do you think he should have? So his run was basically from November to I think it was like what, May,
Yeah, it was about
June,
May.
right?
Yeah.
So about 6 or so months. But how long of a run would you guys want Sting to have with the company?
I would have, if the rumors are true, I would have liked to see him come in that 2011 mark because, Undertaker was just coming off the back-to-back matches with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
So I know they went right into the feud with Triple H, but I feel like the fact that he had he ended up having two matches with Triple H, like that that WrestleMania, that first match that of Triple H, like it should have been Sting. And I feel like 2011 might have been, like obviously, you know, they were both a little bit older at that time, but I feel like that 2011, like how they had that promo set up. And even I remember we were all excited, like, hey, this is finally going to happen. It's going to be Sting. It's going to be Sting. And it would
Right.
be The Undertaker. Like for me, 2011 would have been the time for him to come in.
For sure. But at the same time, having it done in 2014, they still could have made that magic happen. And
Yeah.
it's always going to remain, like, it's always going to leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth as a wrestling fan to be like, the match that I wanted the most never happened. And it's like Baldy was talking about earlier. It wasn't even so much the match. It was purely the hype. It was a build-up.
Exactly.
And in the old school days, much like when the Sting character even came out of, you know, the old school blonde hair, bright face paint stuff, they took a year of him not speaking, of him just hanging out in the rafters, building that mysterious mystique, and then amping it up for him to come out. And had they taken their time instead of rushing it, with him making his entry at Survivor Series, sure. What perfect way to kind of go toe to toe with Taker than his so-called like birthplace, which is Survivor Series.
Right.
And you amp it up and you just run with it, and you just do like a really slow build, going at it with just those two instead of this Triple H nonsense. And
See,
I know
it's funny though.
It's San Fran and everything, but what was it?
It's funny though, like, which is, you know, you said you hated the build-up that they did with Sting and Triple H because Sting rarely made the appearances. But then imagine if it was done with Undertaker, we probably would have looked at it in a completely different light because obviously you don't want them, you know, face to face every single week. But the fact that like had that build-up done differently, but very similar as well with, you know, both of them making rare appearances, we would have been talking about it in a completely different light compared to where we look at it now, where, you know, it was a 5-6 month build, but we didn't like it.
We didn't like it, but that 5-6 month build was how many appearances is that? Probably like 7.
Well, because
Yeah.
it took about 2 or 3 pay-per-views by the time, you know, they had even agreed to the match. So it was just, you know, Triple H calling them out and this and that, and it led to eventually the challenge happening. And yeah, it wasn't a very good build, but at the same time, they looked at Sting as a special attraction and, you know, didn't want him showing up, you know, on a regular basis.
For sure, but granted, he is a special attraction, the same
Yeah.
way Taker is. What Taker is for WWE, Sting is, and that character is for WCW.
Yeah.
And it's literally like two worlds colliding. But they could have done so much more, even with the limited appearances between those two, was just the effects of Taker kind of coming in and being like, is he here? Is he not here? What's he doing? Is he sending in his druids? Is he sending in someone else? Sting coming in and doing so much more rather than Triple H calling out Sting and, well, kind of sort of showing up, but not really.
Yeah. Well, because I remember
taking over.
Because I remember when we were at WrestleMania 30 in 2014, like, you know, we heard Sting was going to be at WrestleCon, but that was, you know,
dude,
the year he later.
That was the most exciting thing ever.
He debuted later on that year, but we were like, he's going to show up WrestleMania. He's going to show up on Raw. Like we don't want to see him at WrestleCon. We're gonna see him when he debuts on TV, and then, you know, it ended up happening later on that year, but not in April at WrestleMania in November. But it shows, you know, the fan, like at least us as fans, we were ready for it, and, you know, that was the moment that we had thought, hey, it's going to happen.
See, and it's funny because now that, again, I'm going back to like New Orleans and everything, going to WrestleCon and everything else, I remember vividly being like, why would we go see him there? This dude is here right now in New Orleans, and it's all like, this is it. This is when it's happening. And when it didn't happen at Mania, I was like, all right, no big deal. 100% it's happening at Raw.
Yeah.
There is no doubt in my mind, and they didn't. And it was such a big letdown. It was perfect. Like everything, like the cards were perfectly aligned to make it happen. The guy's in the freaking city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it would have been perfect because Taker was, you know, just coming off the loss, and we're like, okay, this is where it's gonna be. You know, he's lost before. It was, hey, you know, it's not gonna happen because, you know, Taker's streak and whatnot. Now Taker's lost, so hey, the outcome can go either way. But just
and Taker didn't even have to be there for that Raw. You know, you knew he was gonna go on hiatus after that match.
Yep.
But I guess they wanted the focus at that time, looking back now, to be Brock beating the streak. And you couldn't move Taker past to Sting with the focus being Brock being the guy who broke the streak.
Which is fair.
You break the streak kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I look back, like, you know, they did a great job with Brock. He ended up, you know, beating Cena, like annihilating Cena later on that year at SummerSlam and becoming champion, which obviously was the right call coming off the streak. So, I mean, in hindsight, Brock ending the streak did wonders for his career because they said, like, looking at it logically, like, who else could have ended the streak?
I ate my words when it came. I remember when it happened, and I think it was just like the wrestling fan in me.
The shock.
Like,
What is this?
How dare they use Brock, this part-timer, This guy who's not even a core WWE guy. He's just
Yep.
like some guy who comes in when he wants because he's a UFC guy now. How
Yep.
dare he the one who break the streak? But looking back on it, he was the guy, and it worked out well. And they ran with that storyline for almost a little over a year until the rematch. So it worked out well.
Yeah, so just kind of going back to TJ's point, so I think I do agree with TJ. I think the 2016 run that he had was fine, like in terms of what the time he came in, because I think he still had a little bit of juice left. And I do agree. I think that 7-8 months was more than enough time for him to kind of set up a feud with Taker. So okay, so if we kind of bookend it where he's going to have a 7 to 8 month run with the company, and it culminating with a match against Taker. The issue that I had when he came in and immediately kind of squared off with Triple H is, what was his motive? Like, why is he going after Triple H? Like, he's not going for a title. There's nothing at stake. So like, he wasn't like a wrestler that was driven behind any sort of meaning behind his actions. So I think for me, that was probably the biggest issue, is like, why is he back in the company, and like, what is he wrestling for? So I guess your guys' thoughts on that. And if he were to, so if we're saying that, okay, we're gonna book him for like a 7-month run with Taker, okay, what's his motivation for coming after the Taker? Is it just purely like, you're the man of, like, darkness, as am I, like, let's fight? Or is there something more to it? Or can there be something more to it, I guess, is a better way of phrasing it.
I mean, I think they could have gone. I think they could have gone either way. I think the with him coming in against Triple H, I think it was, they showed Sting was the first one to rise up against the Authority, because at that time the storyline was, Triple H and the Authority taking over and, controlling everyone and everything, and Sting kind of coming in as, the hero, kind of stepping in, the anti-authority essentially. So I think with him and Undertaker, you could have gone many different ways. Like, with coming in as the darkness, or kind of saying, you were for WWE what I was for WCW, like, the icon, the legend, kind of being that long tenured superstar, the only one who didn't jump ship and stayed through the Monday Night Wars. Like, I think there was many different ways they could have gone.
Yeah.
TJ, what do you think?
I mean, I think that's what I was going to. The Sting's whole character, the whole Crow, and even before that, he's always been the savior, almost, kind of thing, especially in the Crow aspect. But he's always been, again, the company guy. He was what Taker was in WCW, as like the through and through company kind of person who stands up against the NWO, who stands up against tyranny and all this other stuff. And him coming in against Triple H, I kind of get it, because, like Baldy mentioned, he is coming against the Authority. He's speaking for the people that are being oppressed. He's going to cleanse the WWE of all this stuff that Triple H is all about. And what better way to do it than go at the top of the pecking order and taking out the guy who's calling all the shots, in this case, Triple H. So I saw that, and I felt like that was where they were coming at it from an angle perspective. But even then, even if that was his initial foray into WWE and him coming after Triple H, they could have easily swapped out Triple H, like him coming in, taking out Triple H as the Authority, and then streamlining the storyline with Taker. Because Taker's like, hold on, this is my yard. That whole Roman angle, who are you to come in and do this sort of stuff? And then, like Baldy said, it's like you're literally having company guy versus company guy. This match is literally WCW versus WWE, and that would have been the build-up for that. So I don't mind him coming in against the Authority, but they should have pivoted real quick and then have Taker solidified to be like, I'm the guy who's going to be coming at you, and then do the whole darkness versus darkness thing, because that was literally what everybody wanted.
Yeah, because I mean, like with Sting debuting at SummerSlam, you could have done the build and even had him and Triple H at Royal Rumble. Like, if you want to have the match, give Sting a warm-up, give him Triple H at Royal Rumble, and that still gives you about 3 months to build to WrestleMania.
And that really, all you needed was about 2 months for that Triple H thing.
Yeah.
It was such a minor blimp of a storyline, rather than dragging it out and taking it to WrestleMania and giving it like an elite status card, because that's what WrestleMania is all about. Everyone dreams of making it on that card. and to give a spot up to Triple H versus Sting, it was so blah. Granted, the delivery was okay because you brought the NWO comeback, you had DX come back, you know, all the old timers like, yo, man, this is very nostalgic and it's so much fun. But it was
So,
it was a waste.
so
But
the reason for that is, we'll quickly touch on that. So the reason for that was, so everybody was unhappy with the result with Sting losing. But the reason behind that was with, Rock and Triple H had a stare down later on at WrestleMania. And so the plan was for Rock and Triple H to headline WrestleMania 32 in Dallas. So it was going to be a 1-year build with Triple H and The Rock. And they figured with, which, even if they wanted to do that, because they had fought so much beforehand, so much history, had Triple H lost to Sting, it wouldn't have hurt his credibility. But WWE being WWE, it was, hey, he has to come off a big win at WrestleMania against Sting, and then we're going to start the build up for The Rock. So that
But
was
doesn't that
that
go
was
to
the
the
behind the
point of
scenes.
not even putting Sting in with Triple H at Mania in the first place?
Yeah.
But that's what we're talking about.
yeah,
Like, it was such a waste. Like, why even bother putting
uh,
Sting there?
but like I do want to just kind of say, like, I don't know if I would call it a complete waste, because that moment, and I don't want to skip over it, because that moment where you had DX versus NWO in the ring was amazing.
It was.
Like I know everyone looked very old, but like that moment was so cool as like a 90s wrestling fan, especially when like Sting broke Triple H's sledgehammer with his bat, right? Like that whole exchange was awesome, right? Like, granted, the whole build up with Triple H was kind of a waste and didn't make sense, but if like that moment that we got with NWO and DX in the same ring was unreal, and I thought
I'll
they
give you that.
executed that very well. But just the ending made no sense, because I felt like they were kind of glowing. They were basically kind of setting up the match where he was gonna like break the sledgehammer with his bat and then kind of hit his finisher and win the match. And I think that would have then catapulted him to go potentially up against Undertaker, right? Because like he beat Triple H, he beat DX. Now there's only one person left to keep the honor of WWE, if you want to call it that, and that's Undertaker. So I kind of felt like they had a moment there, and I personally thought that's where they were going with that match as I was watching it in like real time. But then when Triple H won, you killed that whole moment, and with him winning, and it just made no sense. But I just wanted to kind of interject, because I did think that NWO and DX moment was super cool.
No,
I
that
will give you that. I'd be lying. I would be absolutely lying if I said I wasn't marking out so hard
Yeah,
when the
yeah,
DX music hit, when the
Yeah.
NWO music hit, when the NWOs like literally were taking their walkers and going down to the ring. But still, it was a phenomenal moment
Yeah.
that never would have came about
yeah,
otherwise. I think that there's two other points to that. One is I totally see the angle between him taking out Triple H and then now what? And they could
yeah,
have even had to do a bit of a heel run, which would have been so sick. And then Taker be like, hold on, I'm representing WWE. I'm going to be stepping up and taking you down
yeah,
just because you took out Triple H. But the other thing is, I just remembered as I'm like reliving that whole experience of DX and NWO and all that, is this was in San Fran.
yeah.
So this was an outdoor WrestleMania.
That part sucked. Yeah, I
And an
agree.
outdoor WrestleMania would not have done justice to a Taker versus Sting.
Yeah,
Just the whole setup and everything. Like you need that darkness component.
yeah, 1000%. Yeah,
So in a way, maybe it is a good thing. But had they done Taker versus Sting and it's like daylight all around, might have been a little lackluster.
yeah. So maybe I'll just kind of go into how I would kind of book it, and I'll just kind of get your guys' thoughts on it. So, like, I think I'd probably just keep his whole angle with Triple H. While I didn't love it, but just if the end product was going to be DX versus NW in the ring, okay, fine, I can live with it. But I would have Sting win, and then the next night on Raw, I would have him come out and just kind of do a whole spiel on like, like I've always wanted to come here, I never did because like blah blah blah. But like I kind of feel like I have my place in wrestling. I have now my place in WWE. I beat the head guy here. Like the only thing that's left for me is to now enter the Hall of Fame, right? Because he kind of needs like that little like kind of carrot, or like what he like, just so the fans know what his like motivation is. So he kind of like gives his whole spiel and like kind of ends it with saying that my goal is to make it into the Hall of Fame. And then that's when you have the lights turn off. Taker comes out, they do their little kind of promo. Taker kind of goes into saying, you know, like, I'm the one that like runs this thing, not Triple H, blah blah blah. They kind of set up their feud, and it's basically a Hall of Fame versus career match at WrestleMania 32, which is Undertaker's hometown, Dallas. You have your indoor stadium. You can kind of like turn off the lights, and then that's where you kind of have that match. But the only difference that I would have is Sting beating Taker, and then
That's controversial.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but because like I would have wanted, because it makes sense for Sting to kind of have some sort of motivation, or you could always just flip it and just have his whole angle of Triple H being for the Hall of Fame, and then because I know he got inducted before WrestleMania 31. Correct me if I'm wrong, Baldy, but I think that's when he got inducted. So you could have kind of had the whole like Hall of Fame angle, and Triple H saying like, you know what, no, like you can never join the WWE Hall of Fame. You're never part of WWE, blah blah blah, and him saying no, like I did all this, and so they kind of
Actually,
fight
no,
for it.
Sting actually didn't get inducted till 2 years later. It was 2016 when he went in.
Was it 2016?
It was 2016. Yeah. He didn't go in right away.
Oh, okay,
That's when he stopped.
2016.
But so you could always just kind of have that like Hall of Fame angle with Triple H, because like I really enjoyed that DX NWO moment. So you could have that whole angle, and then have Sting win, and then just kind of set up like a career versus career match with Sting and Taker at WrestleMania 32. And then I guess if you want Taker to win, that's fine. But I think that's kind of how I would kind of set up the parameters around Taker versus Sting.
Did you want to go next?
Sure. I'm going to go similar yet a little bit different, because I like the idea of doing the whole Triple H Sting thing at Rumble, like Baldy mentioned, and having it almost like 2 months after the whole Survivor Series debut, and keeping that in a bit of a short window. I do like the idea of building up to Dallas.
Yeah.
I think that would have been perfect for both of them, and for a lot of reasons. But I would have loved to see Sting go the heel route, coming in, taking out Triple H, and building off of what you said in that last answer of saying, "Hey, I just took out the top dog here, and this is what you have. This is what I waited for. This is what I came to 14 years later, or like 13 years later. You know, this is like, we came here and we took over. And we've shown that we're better than almost all this inside WWE talent that you have, and really gone like anti-WWE. Then Taker comes in and he's defending his yard, and they build it up that way. I don't mind the whole career versus career thing. I think it would have been cool. We all know that Taker kind of pushed it, even though he went off on a great highlight with the Boneyard match. But it would have been a great finish. But I would have loved to see them really push that angle of WCW versus WWE, build that animosity like they did the old school days when they had like country versus country, or like, you know, nation of domination, race versus race kind of thing. But really kind of like hone in on that, because that's what sort of brings out those feelings, those sentiments, and that's what like makes people go crazy in the fans. And you would have brought back, and even that promo, besides the whole darkness and darkness thing, it would have been so cool seeing the WCW guys coming out and supporting Sting.
Yeah.
And saying, yeah, man, we're team WCW and we're like way better than any of you guys here, kind of stuff. Yeah, and then like you said, build it up to Dallas, because that would have been the perfect to run it.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I'm gonna go a little bit of a different route. See, I would have liked the long build. I would have done a 1-year build. I would have done, you know, what we talked about of Sting possibly appearing at New Orleans. I would have had somehow, some way, the Undertaker Brock Lesnar match at WrestleMania 30 becomes sort of like a no disqualification. You know, Taker has him up for the tombstone. He's about to finish him. Suddenly the lights go out. Sting appears at WrestleMania, costs Undertaker the streak.
Oh, so does he cost him the match? Because I thought you said no disqualification.
Yeah, he costs. It's a no disqualification match. So you know, Sting causes the interference, and then
that works because the thing that Baldy says earlier is that the streak's over and done with. Now you don't have that to worry about.
Yep.
Then.
Yeah.
So then Taker can take his long hiatus, and you know, like Sting doesn't have to show up immediately. So you have the long build. So later on, you know, Sting makes like a somewhat surprise appearance somewhere, and you can have him another
Survivor
short
Series, let's just
feud.
say.
Yeah, maybe even
Yeah.
Survivor Series.
Okay.
And then you start the build up, because Taker took essentially a year off after the streak. After he lost to Lesnar, he came back at 31 against Bray Wyatt. So I think that would have been the perfect tenure to have a long build. But then again, with Sting being the special attraction, you have him show up at WrestleMania. He costs Undertaker the streak, and then even he disappears. So everybody wonders, like, what
to
was
run
it?
with that, now you got me all excited about this angle because that could totally work. And the
Yeah.
best thing about that is, again, building up that animosity thing.
Exactly.
He could literally be building up without Taker there and simply saying, "Where's Taker? I'm
Yeah.
waiting for you. You're running scared."
Yeah.
And then Taker comes back full force, which is what he does with his wrestling promos and stuff.
Yeah, and then Sting could come in, I wanted to make an impact. Like, it's the matchup everybody wanted for so many years. So I figured, what better way to make an impact than go after the biggest dog in the yard.
And not only that, but also coming at him and going, instead of me waiting for you to come to me, which is what I've been doing, I decided to bring the fight to you.
Yeah.
And now when you're like, that's his thing to WWE. That would have been a pretty sick intro too.
So that's how I
So
would
then-
do it. You
so
have the
then-
1 year build up.
So then basically, okay, so remind me again, what WrestleMania was it when he lost the streak? Was it 30?
He lost at 30.
30. So WrestleMania 31, there's no Taker, no Sting.
31 was
31
Bray
was
Wyatt,
in
but
San
yeah,
Fran.
31.
So like there's no mention of them. And then 32 is when they would have that match?
Yeah, I would do the 2 year build. Maybe even go past a year, do 2 years.
Ooh, 2 years is kind of pushing it though. Now that you
Yeah.
put it in chronological order, dude, 2 years in today's wrestling world, that ain't happening.
I wonder if, yeah, like that's the only thing, 'cause that's a long build.
I mean, they did Rock and Cena for a year.
But that was a year, and they already knew that they were going to redo it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, but
2 years would have been pushing it. I think you would have needed something in between. But to literally have him come in 2014 and then fight in 2016,
Yeah.
like, I like the idea of it, but 2 years is a long time.
well, I mean, then you would have had your 31 match, but with the entrances and whatnot, would it have still been the same?
It wouldn't have. No way.
Because for me, the big thing is make an impact at the debut. And yeah, like, it's like I said, in hindsight, if I could do it backwards, I would have had probably Sting come in, in 2011. But since we're talking hypothetically of him coming in 2014, like, for me, the debut's the impact.
Unless if then, so basically kind of go with what you said. Have Sting cost him the match at WrestleMania 30, and then WrestleMania 31 have the whole angle starting from Survivor Series with him and Triple H. But then again, he breaks his bat over his sledgehammer, the bat breaks the sledgehammer, and then he's about to do his finisher, and then the lights go off. Taker costs him the match against Triple H, and then WrestleMania 32 is when you kind of have them square off.
That could very well work, because you could have.
I think that's
Taker.
the only way that you can kind of have a 2 year build, is because I think you need Sting a little bit active just to kind of keep people's attention span. But then that way you kind of have both of them kind of costing each other their matches and kind of creating enough heat on both sides so that it kind of sets up their match.
In the fans' eyes, you could have
That
been,
would've been sick.
after
That would've been
Taker
so
lost
sick.
at WrestleMania 30, like, is he done? Is his career over? And then suddenly he shows up at WrestleMania 31.
I do like the idea of them going tit for tat.
Yeah.
One costing one and then the other one coming back and doing it again 1 year later. And by that time, wrestling fans have already been accustomed to Taker going on hiatus post WrestleMania. So you already don't expect them, no matter what people say, to be showing up for a long time. So waiting a year for him to come back and cost Sting would have been kind of cool. But I mean, the compromise situation in this also would have been, let the streak continue, lose the streak in San Fran, and then do a year build.
Right.
It's one of those great what if scenarios. If things that happen differently, right?
True. But you know what? Another what if situation in this, as like a little small thing, and you can honestly dedicate a whole episode to this, is what if Taker versus Sting happened when Taker jumped ship in '97? Say Taker went to WCW.
But he wouldn't have been able to take the character with him.
He wouldn't have, but they could have built something else around it. I mean,
Well,
look at the
then,
Warrior. He went into the
well,
Warrior
if,
and just made his own thing
well, that's because he legally changed his name to Warrior.
afterwards. Yeah, but they
Well,
could have done something.
well, technically, Sting and the Undertaker happened in WCW in 1989
It doesn't
when he
really.
when he was Mean Mark
Mark
Callis.
Callis. No, that doesn't work. It wasn't even televised. It was some random house show, and it was before Taker was big. People want to hold on to that, but no, it doesn't work.
But that's a good point, TJ. But like, I just don't trust the writers at WCW to really kind of capture
No.
that moment. I don't think they would have done it justice.
I mean, you look at what they did with Bret Hart's WCW run. I'm sure that'll be another what if episode in the future.
Yeah,
But you
but
look at
yeah, no, I don't think they would have. So I'm glad that he didn't jump ship because I think they would have really botched it.
Yeah.
They probably had like Buff Bagwell come out in the middle of the ring of the match.
You know, man, Buff Bagwell was the stuff back in the day, okay? And he literally had the most perfect goatee I've ever seen on a person. And that top hat, he was
I'm
like
just
a
wondering.
mid-carder who I thought was a main eventer.
I'm just wondering how he's working right now in Vegas during COVID.
Let's we got nothing but love for Buff, okay? Buff was the stuff back in the day.
But yeah, no, Baldy, I definitely like your booking on that one. I would definitely. I think a 2-year angle works as long as you have Sting active at WrestleMania 31 and then culminate. I think we all agree at WrestleMania 32 in Dallas. I think that would have been the perfect place to have that match.
I agree, and I think that's a solid way to wrap things up for today. And we shall discuss our next topic. I wonder what that's going to be. Well, you alluded to the invasion. What are you thinking in that regard?
I mean, I'd touch on, you look back about a year later and all the main WCW guys had shown up. So what if they had held on to the invasion for another year and you had Ric Flair, you had Goldberg, you had the NWO? How would the invasion have looked different?
Yeah.
Feels like a pretty good segue.
I think that's going to be the basis for next time's episode is the invasion and the big what ifs left with that.
Perfect.
Well, till then.